today. And the basic take-home point is that bigger reinforcers are better, given all things being. So let's look at the variables that influence reinforcer effectiveness. Quick review. The reinforcer is the event, the thing, the condition that follows the behavior and is going to increase the frequency of that behavior and future likelihood, future strength. So, we've also touched on earlier the contingency, the if-then relationship. We saw that in our contingency diagrams that we did a while back on the reinforcement chapter. So this is a little bit of a review then. We must have the contingent arrangement, the contingent presentation. The presentation of the reinforcer depends on the occurrence of a specific behavior. That's the contingency. You can use the word desired behavior simply meaning that's the behavior that I want to increase. A specific behavior, desired behavior, when that behavior occurs, then the reinforcer follows. That's the contingency, the if-then relationship, that dependent relationship. Another way to describe it is that the behavior causes the presentation of the reinforcer. Immediacy is critically important. The rule of thumb for immediacy is as close to 0 seconds after the behavior has occurred. As close to 0 seconds after the behavior has occurred. When we have that immediate reinforcement of a behavior, it's going to cause a direct effect on that behavior because of the temporal relationship. The behavior is occurring almost at the same time as the reinforcer. It's producing that outcome. If we delay the reinforcer, then other stuff comes between the occurrence of the behavior and the presentation of the reinforcer. It could be another behavior. At the very least, it's time. And when we have that gap between the occurrence of the behavior and the presentation of the reinforcer, very little to no learning will occur. Magic number is 60 seconds. If you get out to 60 seconds and you're trying to reinforce a behavior 60 seconds after its occurrence, very little, if any, learning of that behavior will occur. We've got to have immediate reinforcement within 0 seconds as much as possible. Size. This is what we talked about when we began the shaping task. Bigger is better in most cases. Bigger is better. The book uses the language worthwhile. For human beings, that reinforcer must be worthwhile. It must be enough, in other words. Let's say that you are going to apply for a job, a part-time job. And they say, well, I'll pay you $7.45, which is the minimum wage. You go to another place and they say, I'll pay you $12. Which one is providing a more worthwhile reinforcer? Are you more likely to work for $12 or $7.45? 12. It's a much more worthwhile, it's a bigger reinforcer. And if the job's the same, which one are you going to go to? The one where you get more reinforcement, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, we can do this very easily when we work with infrahumans. We increase the amount of reinforcer by ounces, or milligrams, or grams of food. That's pretty straightforward. With humans, it's a little bit more complex. We've got to identify if that event is of value to the person. Is it worthwhile? Is it a preferred event? Okay? How many folks listen to music of some flavor and variety? Okay? Most everybody, right? So I have a flash drive filled with all kinds of digital music. I have a bunch of them, a bunch of flash drives. So when you answer a question correctly, I immediately throw that flash drive to you, and you have, you know, a gazillion tunes on that flash drive. Would that be reinforcing? You said you like music. Why not? I can't quite hear you.
It may not be something I like.
It may not be a reinforcer for you, right? It's not worthwhile. So we have to make sure that we have a reinforcer that works for you. That's what makes it interesting and complex when we talk about human beings. That notion of worthwhileness. Reinforcers are strongly influenced by behavioral effort. Behavioral effort. If you have to put a lot of effort into getting a small reinforcer, what might happen? Nothing. You'll stop responding because it's just not enough of a payoff for all that work. Behavioral effort. So if you have a really effortful task, what must you do as a teacher, instructor, trainer? Provide small reinforcers or one that's more worthwhile? You got to provide a bigger reinforcer for that person. But are you going to give them are you going to give that person everything? No. You're going to keep them hungry, so to speak. You're going to give a reasonable amount of reinforcement, but you're also going to make sure that they keep responding. That's why you give them a little bit, a taste, so to speak, and then they respond some more, you give them a little bit more, and so on. Competing contingencies. We all wrestle against competing contingencies. A competing contingency is simply this. There's a reinforcement contingency for this behavior, and there's a reinforcement contingency for this behavior. And they're operating at the same time. Which reinforcement contingency produces the most reinforcement? Is it A or is it B? If A produces more reinforcement for a behavior compared to B, what are you going to do? You're going to respond to this contingency that produces more reinforcement than this one, which produces less. Competing contingencies. And then you factor in effort. If this one gives you a lot of reinforcement for low response effort, this is less reinforcement for more effort, what are you going to do? You're going to go to less effort, more reinforcement. So here's an example. Studying for classes versus playing with your friends or playing by yourself on your video game. Which is more effortful? Studying or playing?
Playing.
Studying?
Studying.
Versus playing.
I was thinking about what was more fun.
No, which is more effortful? Studying or playing? Studying. Which provides more reinforcement? Studying or playing? Immediate reinforcement.
Oh, well, right.
Playing. Now we've got a competing contingency, less effort, more reinforcement compared to studying. But what's the big delayed reinforcer for studying? Your grade on a test and a grade in the class. And then what's the big reinforcer after you take all these classes? You might graduate. And what's the big reinforcer after graduation? Assuming they don't look at your transcripts. You might get a job. But if they look at your transcripts and you've been spending a lot of time playing, what are your grades going to be like? Oh, it was fun playing video games. My grades sucked because there's too much effort and not enough reinforcement for studying. And now you're at Walmart. No joke. Which brings us, this is a nice segue, not even planned. Motivation. What motivates people is not what is under your skin or between your ears. What motivates behavior is what lies in the environment. The consequences of your behavior. And how much reinforcement you've had for that behavior. Two basic types of motivating operations. Deprivation. Deprivation. This is where you are deprived, have limited access to a reinforcer. It increases the strength of that reinforcer. And it alters the behavior that you have to perform to get that reinforcer. That behavior is going to be performed more forcefully, effectively, under conditions of deprivation, more quickly, because you've been deprived of the reinforcer. Deprivation. If you're deprived of food for 8 hours and then you have a plate of food put in front of you, what happens to your eating behavior? It's fast, isn't it? You're just shoveling that food down into your mouth and chewing it, maybe swallowing it whole. So your rate of eating goes up, and the way in which you eat changes. You might use your hands, 2 utensils to get it all in there, because you're deprived of that reinforcer. Now, the flip side of deprivation is called satiation. Satiation is when you have unlimited access to a reinforcer and that reinforcer loses its effectiveness. And it's going to alter the behavior with respect to that reinforcer. You're not going to respond very effortfully to get that reinforcer. If you do respond, it will be slow, long latency to occur. Because it's not a potent reinforcer, yes.
If we're asked what the opposite of, asked about deprivation or whatever, and would we put unknown or would we put satiation? Does that make sense? If it's like
I'm not sure what your question is.
If it's not deprivation on a test question.
It could be satiation or it could be an unknown, because we're just covering 2 motivating operations. There are others. Okay, so if Jimmy John Lipskin has been deprived of playing baseball for 6 weeks because he broke his leg and now his cast is off, and playing baseball has been a reinforcer for him. As soon as he gets his cast off, what might he do very quickly? Play baseball, because he's been deprived of that reinforcer. But then we won't mention any names. I have a student who's an athlete. He awfully grueling schedule. I feel sorry for him. Long days throughout the week, long practices, and he's been doing this for, a couple of years. Might he be kind of satiated on that thing called playing baseball?
Mm.
So when he has the opportunity to play, next time, hey, you want to play baseball? I don't think so. It's just not reinforcing anymore. Okay? So we have our example here, very similar. You're at a restaurant, you have a 5-course dinner. It's great, tastes wonderful. By the time you get through the 5th course, you are satiated on food as a reinforcer. And they come out and say, would you like dessert? And because you're satiated on food, you have this big pause, don't you? Oh, I don't know if I can get anything more in me.
Take it to go.
And then you might take it to go. But you don't eat it, that's different, isn't it? That's a completely different response than eating. Or you say, no, I don't want it. Satiated on the food.
Oops.
Perfect timing there. Great.
I totally did not mean
Nice
it.
job.
It's okay. It's all good.
We'll keep that in.
Oh.
Great.
Since you crashed. What's your name?
That's good. I'm Dante.
You know